There are many independent Chinese studios that produce dinosaurs and other prehistoric models. As good as they are, it would be impossible to collect them all due to finite resources. The money for sure, but more importantly, the space. So I hope to get maybe just one representative from each of the well-known houses. An example is the Vitae Jinyunpelta, and for Shenzhen and Dinwan Studios, I was lucky enough to get more than one. Another I've always wanted to see for myself is Musee Studio. I first saw a photo of their Diabloceratops, but I've never been able to find one at an affordable price. The only way I could enjoy it was vicariously from Andy's review, which, fun fact, was also his very first video. Since then, they've produced other dinosaurs that didn't interest me, until these release images came along, of Borealopelta, my favorite nododsaurid. So I decided that this would be my first foray with Musee. Now, you never get an actual product painted like the release image. Musee Studios recently released their Diplodocus, which I passed on because I didn't like the form and the pose, though I did like the color application. But when I saw the in-hand images, well, it had gone from this to this. So I knew I was taking a risk. Now let me show you the result of that gamble. First of all, the packaging is really nice. It looks and feels really premium, as you can see just from the unusual shape of the box. On the inside, there are the usual foam cutouts, and the different items are very well and safely packed. And here's the Borealopelta. Now this polystone/ABS statue is 43 centimeters or 17 inches long. At an estimated 5.5 meters or 18 feet, that's a 1:13 scale. The official stated scale is 1:15. And taking the span of the parascapular spines, it's about 15 centimeters or 6 inches wide. It's 13 centimeters or 5.1 inches tall at the highest point of the sacral shield. And here's how we would compare standing next to it. Assuming a 1:13 scale for a 6-foot Zodak. Borealopelta is a real treasure and a very rare one. Because it's so well preserved, we actually have large expanses of armour in situ, unlike many other ankylosaurs. So while those have some leeway for artistic license, not so for the Borealopelta. And that maybe that's why so few have taken up the challenge of meeting these exacting standards. Just the always courageous CollectA in 2018, and PNSO in 2020. Let's see how well this Musee statue replicates it. First, let's go for the head. Now at this large scale, you expect to see accurate detail, and you do get it. From the side, you'll see the typical sheep-like profile of the head, tapering to that choosy nododsaurid snout. Then we can look for some autapomorphies of Borealopelta. Now first is the frontoparietal plate, which should be roughly hexagonal. The jugal plate has a pointed apex, and its base is also longer than the length of the orbit. Then there should be more than 20 frontonasal dermal plates. The external nares should be excluded from view dorsally, and indeed it is. The distance from the back of the frontoparietal plate to the start of the cervical half rings looks good as well. The coloration of Borealopelta is described as rust or reddish-brown dorsally, countershaded with a lighter ventral, as inferred from pigment studies. In general, the paint application is very nice, with each of these dermal plates having a blend of colors. And the infusion of red in the frontoparietal is especially beautiful. Now moving down. In Borealopelta, the cervical and thoracic osteoderms form continuous transverse bands, separated by transverse strips or polygonal scales. It should have 3 cervical bands, 12 thoracic, and at least 8 sacral bands, and that's the case with this statue. For the cervical region, the osteoderms have hexagonal bases, bisected by central keels. Their size increases from anterior to posterior. From the midline, the keels increase in height and size to end in lateral spines like Edmontonia and Sauropelta. Check the gait here. The colour is also very well applied, with the lateralmost spines having a lighter coloration, which agrees with the inferred pigmentation from the parascapular spines. In the thoracic region, the T3 and the T6 bands of osteoderms pinch off laterally. That's indeed the case here. As with the cervicals, separating the transverse bands are these bands of basement scales. I like the clearly polygonal shapes, though I feel that the separations for some could be deeper. The underlying wash is a light colour, though I wish it was darker. In fact, I generally feel a darker dorsal area would have looked much nicer, with greater counter-shading contrast. As we move posteriorly, we transition into the rounder scutes of the sacral area. And unfortunately here, many of these scutes seem to be very unicolor and simplistic, especially at this large size. I do wish they could have added some washes or dry brushing perhaps. Just compare this to the caputaguli on the head again. Then the proximal tail looks good, but moving distally, the colour looks a little flat in the scutes. But the lateralmost skirting spikes still look good. Now what about the nitty-gritty details? When the PNSO came out, I declined to actually count the osteoderms, unlike the crazy guys at Paleonerd, which incidentally is a blog I highly recommend if, like me, you still like the written word. Now this good fellow actually counted every osteoderm in the PNSO, and while I bowed out of that then, at this larger size, I feel I have no excuse for slacking off. Now I should note, in the thoracic area, the right side of the fossil is more complete than the left, so I'll estimate based on the number of osteoderms on the right and then double it. Also, Musee Studio does give it these skirting spines here, which are not preserved, so I won't count them. The cervical bands have 6 osteoderms each. Correct. Between the cervical and thoracic bands, there's a transitional zone, with one lateral spine and a smaller one medial to it. That's done correctly here. Then we have T1, and there should be 6 per side, including the parascapular spine. Now surprisingly, for such a large area, Musee drops the ball. You have instead 5 per side, including the parascapular spine. The smaller PNSO actually has it correct. T2, 16, and in Musee, 16. In T3, 6, and Musee, 6. In T4, 18, and in Musee there are 20, so 2 more. T5, there are 18, and in the Musee it's 22. In T6, it's 12, and Musee also 12, and just like T3, correctly and laterally pinched off. So in general, really very close, and I think acceptable as variations, though the T1 is a bit disappointing. Tragically, the rear half of the fossil was lost, so Borealopelta reconstructions generally follow the typical nododsaurid bow plan. There are at least 8 sacral bands in the fossil, and so too is it with Musee. And as for the osteoderms, from the sacral one onwards, the bands are incomplete on either side, so I think it would be mad to continue the exercise. Some might argue I was mad to begin with, even before reaching the sacrals. Now that we've looked at the armoured dorsal, let's look at the rest. First, the arms. The forearm does have osteoderms, and Musee includes that here, as well as up the arm. You can also see the rest of the integument are finely detailed with small scales, and the colour blends are very good. I like how the outside is darker and contrasts with the inside of the arm. And down here, you can see the well-sculpted and realistically painted fingers and claws. Although Musee has given the 4th and 5th digit claws as well, something that's incorrect, as no archosaur has been found with more than 3 as far as I know. I really like the shape of the hand and how it looks like in weight bearing. And underneath, just look at the tiny palmar scales and how nicely the nail is painted. And while we're here, let's continue with the underside. In the pectoral area, just look at the fine creases and the scale detail. And then going up the throat, I really like the tension and the skin detail on these sternocleidomastoid muscles. And these little spines along the throat area are a very nice touch of detail. Love the mottling in the sides and the throat, then the intermixing of colours here, and then the blending so pleasingly into the tip. Moving back down to the belly region, you'll notice the very delicate detail of the scales, which are a very different aesthetic from the PNSO. The PNSO has a very clearly delineated chainmail look, while the Musee is less textured. I love the PNSO, but I also really like this different aesthetic. This doesn't look like laziness because there's actually no poverty of detail, but it's very subtle. You can clearly see the polygonal scale sculpted in, but at varying depth in different regions. This pinkish hue hints at the relative thinness of skin in these areas. Very nicely sculpted groin creases here, and the mandatory cloaca. And going down the tail, you'll also see how naturally faded these skirting spines are. Lighter in colour than the dorsal surface here. So again, a nice subtle variation. And now the hind limbs. Very well sculpted this is, with appropriately sized basement scales, scutes, and creases. Again, like the arm, I like how it's differently shaded, with a darker anterior and a lighter posterior zone of colour. Form and colour of the feet and claws, just very nice. And like the hands, the plantar surface detail, again very exquisite. Unlike the PNSO, this Borealopelta is caught in mid-stride, with the head and the tail proudly held aloft. It's turned towards the left, which I really love because it's a similar orientation to the preserved fossil. A very nice callback to those hauntingly beautiful black and white photographs. When you see these, it's almost like looking at a real animal, or at least a very new mummy, and it's my dream one day to be able to see it live. Meanwhile, this will have to be it for now. Now let's talk about the base. There are a few parts. You have the main part here, to which you magnetically attach this larger branch. And 3 lonely clumps of vegetation you insert into small holes. In sum, with a few scattered twigs, a rather desolate scene. There's also a little puddle of water here, suggesting a drought. Some signs of green in the sand suggests remnants of drying scum as the water evaporates. And on the underside, some information. You see Borealopelta, 北方盾龙, 1 to 15 scale. Mine is number 46 of 100. Alright, let's talk some science. There are many words used in association with the integument of armored dinosaurs. Because terms like spikes, plates, osteoderms, and such might seem bewildering, I thought it would be interesting to talk about these based on the works of various authors from Ford, Blows, and Armour all the way back to Mantel. First, some general terms. Caputaguli are flat, thigh-like bones that cover the roof and the sides of ankylosaurian skulls. Now, this is a very commonly used and accepted term now, very useful for describing ankylosaur skull anatomy, and credit should really be given to William Blows, who originated it in 2001. The coronux is another term introduced by Blows to refer to the caudolateral horns, here and here. For the upper squamosal horn, he proposed dorsal coronux, and the lower jugal horn, ventral coronux. Now, I haven't seen this used often, but it's too cool not to introduce it. Now, the shield is a broad flat layer of bone which covers the pelvic and sacral areas of ankylosaurs. The basement scales, Bell 2012, constitute the background pattern of the integumentary surface. The feature scales are larger scales that are distinct from the basement scales. And Bell has called these structures, in Gryposaurus here, midline feature scales. Now for osteoderms, which is a term used to describe anything from feature scales to spikes. Osteoderms are a broad term referring to bony structures inserted into the dermis or the skin. They are often overlain by scales or keratin. Now, osteoderms themselves have different morphotypes that have been described by various authors. An ossicle is really a smaller osteoderm, defined by Arbour as being less than 1 cm, or 0.4 inches. She defined an osteoderm as being more than 1 cm. So the primary difference is size. Ossicles are often set as mosaics between larger elements, including osteoderms. Spine or spike. Now these are tall pointed elements with solid round bases. The diameter is less than the total height. Mantel of course referred to Iguanodon's thumb spike, and more relevantly, we talk about parascapular spines, such as in Kentrosaurus or Borealopelta today. A plate is an osteoderm with a tall, dorsal, flat keel with rounded or sharp points. The most obvious example is seen in stegosaurs. A scute, going back to Owen in 1863, is a low-ridged keeled osteoderm with an oval shape. The keel may be central or displaced to either side. Now, scute, however, is also a word that's often been used to describe the keratin structure overlying an osteoderm, and in fact I often use it this way myself in my videos. Now here's the thing, however, when reading a paper, using these terms are of course correct, since the author is often describing a fossil, which mostly is osseous tissue. However, when referring to what you see in a living animal, or a representation in a model, these aren't, strictly speaking, osteoderms, but the overlying keratinous tissue. Now, this overlying keratin is often called a scute, which is quite a confusing term. Armour, Hall, Vicarious and others instead call this overlying tissue a keratinous or an epidermal scale. In 2014, Armour was more precise and called it an epiosteodermal scale, a keratinous external structure that's associated with an underlying osteoderm. This differentiates it from the basement scales without underlying osteoderms. Still, I believe there's no universally strict ruling, and in papers and even talks by paleontologists, I've seen and heard them use osteoderms or any of its morphotypes interchangeably, even when referring to the living animal. Now, most of us know that the horns found as fossils aren't the actual form of the horn in real life, but just a bony core. The overlying keratin determines the external form. In fact, the living appearance of horns and armour often can't be predicted just from the shape of the underlying bone, and you can see Dr. Mark Witten's example of this in his speculative Triceratops growth series, ending up with something like this, which is certainly plausible, but which I find incredibly unromantic. In most fossils, we can usually measure either the bony core or the whole horn, including the bony core and the keratin. However, so well preserved is Borealopelta that in some osteoderms, we can actually measure the dimensions of bony core and the keratin sheath independently, and the results are interesting. For most of the thoracic osteoderms, from T3 to T12, the epiosteodermal scale thickness is relatively uniform and makes up 2 to 6% of the overall height. In T1 and T2, excluding the parascapular spine, the epiosteodermal scale increases in thickness towards the keel, making up 6 to 13% of the overall height. In the cervicals C1 to C3, this is about 16 to 19%. As for the parascapular spine, they caught a lucky break, literally. Now 3/4 of the distance up, the left parascapular spine had a complete break, exposing the cross sections. On the proximal part, you can just see a little bit of bone core here. But on the distal part, nothing. And that means that this part onwards is all keratin, and it can be estimated that the keratinous part accounts for 25 to 30% of the total length of the parascapular spine. And finally, let's talk color. Now, based on chemical analysis of organic compounds in the keratinous areas, Borealopelta was inferred to have been countershaded. Now, dorsally, it was a kind of rust red, and ventrally much lighter. The parascapular spines were obviously lighter too, suggesting in addition to defense, perhaps a kind of display function. Now, the countershading is sobering. Consider extant animals today. You'll notice that countershading camouflage occurs in smaller animals, up to a point. In general, beyond 1,000 kilograms or 2,200 pounds, there's no significant predatory risk, so there's no need for camouflage. Borealopelta at 1,300 kilograms or 2,865 pounds falls here, and still it needed countershading. That means very strong predatory pressures to rely on camouflage, as well as the weapons alone were not enough deterrent. And given Borealopelta's size, these predators must have been fearsome and formidable indeed. So that's it. Now overall I'm very pleased. Detail-wise, there are some differences if you really want to be anal, but really except maybe for the T1 band, those differences can be just put down to normal variation. I do wish the paint application was darker in the dorsal brown and the underwash, and the sacral scutes more complex in the paint application. And also having all 5 fingers clawed may not please purists. But all in all, I'm really happy with this purchase, and it brings me a lot closer to one day seeing the real Borealopelta in person. Take care now, my friends, and I'll see you in the next video.